Welcome to Unparliamentary Language, a podcast that would like to welcome back our new co-host. He's been busy for a while now, but he's back. It's David Cameron!
Hello. Yes. Welcome. Glad to be back. I'm doing this a lot lately, and I feel it's really working. So lovely to be.
And how are you doing, David?
It wasn't David. It was me.
Oh, no.
It was Rob. I tricked you. Oh,
the old bamboozle.
I've let the old bamboozle. It's Rob. I'm here. I'm doing great, thanks. How are you?
Yeah, not bad. As people who listen to our bonus episodes on the Patreon will know, we're in the run-up to Christmas. We've discussed some Christmassy things, and I may be painting a gift for my dad, and we discussed the joy of colour matching old TV shows. So I'm pretty good. I'm quite happy with how things are progressing, but, Christmas could be closer. It's only 2 weeks away. I could do with being on holiday again. I guess we should head on in. We've got, it's been like 2 and a bit weeks since we last recorded or released an episode. So as usual, we've waited a bit of time, but we've got a bit of stuff to catch up on. Because last time we took a bit of a deep dive into Suella Braverman, how she was a bit of a problem. And I think I uttered the immortal words, by the time this is edited, she might be out. So what happened there, Rob?
Yeah, exactly. As you knew, she was gone, I think, within a couple of days of our recording. So either we are the soothsayers, either when we say that you're gone, or the writing was on the wall by the time we got to record that podcast. It's probably the latter. She went out, and in fairly spectacular style, with a resignation letter that Nadine Dorries herself would have been proud of for its sort of like bombshell nature. I think she had a right old go at Rishi Sunak and the government, and in her going, that prompted a massive cabinet reshuffle, and one of the more interesting ones that we've had in recent times for a number of reasons. Not only, I think the standout thing was, I mean, we sort of cover these things. It's on in the background, right? If there's a cabinet reshuffle, I have one eye on BBC News and you see all the rumours going through. And then suddenly there's this bizarre moment where the BBC political correspondent who's standing outside 10 Downing Street says, I think I saw David Cameron go in there. That's weird. And to our great surprise, suddenly he came out as Foreign Secretary. What did you think of that, Tom, as a move from Rishi Sunak?
I mean, it's interesting. I was sat there going, no, there's no way they do that, is there? Which I think was the general kind of response most people had to it. In fact, if you go and watch, I think it was Sky News, they were like, "It's David Cameron," and they were like, "Whoa!" Like it was like me trying to sound relevant with the football fans. It was like transfer season when everyone's like, "Oh, what's going on?" But no, I mean, I think that there are lots of problems David Cameron had when he was in office. We didn't have a podcast back then, so we can't point you back to our thoughts at the time, but I think we probably would have agreed on things he did wrong back then. But it is kind of nice to see someone come back who is mildly competent, which is helpful. Of course, the weird thing is he's not an MP. So they had to make him a member of the House of Lords, which isn't like this has happened in living memory. I think Lord Mandelson did the same thing for Labour during the Brown years. So yet again, historical parallels to what's going on. But yeah, I mean, I think there is definitely. Did we say he came in as Foreign Secretary? Have we mentioned that yet?
I think.
So he came in as Foreign Secretary, and that is obviously if you're getting someone in who basically doesn't have to do the job anymore and is quite happily making money and all that kind of stuff, it's the big ticket. It's the fun job, right? You get to fly around and seem impressive. And also for an ex-prime minister, that is probably one of the better roles because people already know him to an extent. And he has proven that he can talk to those people on a world stage. So like from that point of view, it kind of makes sense. But it does beg the question, are we running out of Conservative MPs?
Yes, and particularly like a foreign secretary is seen as one of like the 4 big offices of state. Like the other ones you would probably say are like Chancellor and Home Secretary. Foreign Secretary is probably the next one down on that list. And it's the one that ambitious young ministers and junior ministers, they're vying for that position. So to give it to somebody who was, sort of completely out of the running and out of the blue, it doesn't really give Conservative MPs under Rishi Sunak like a like a carrot for them to follow, like, be a good MP and maybe you'll get one of these offices of state if you're really loyal. If all of a sudden he can just pull a rabbit out of the hat and give it to an old prime minister. The other thing that would have surprised some and angered many in the party, particularly somebody I mentioned earlier, Nadine Dorries. If you remember, she kind of quit Parliament because she felt that she was owed a place in the House of Lords for her loyalty to Boris Johnson, and she felt that had been refused by Rishi Sunak, and that somebody in Rishi Sunak's government had stopped that move going through. For him to have to effectively fast track a peerage for David Cameron to make sure that he was legally allowed within the cabinet and to serve there, it raises some questions about, yeah, like, these are people who are meant to, you're meant to vote people into Parliament so they represent you and your views. How representative is it really if you can just choose one of your old mates, get him a lordship, and then make him foreign secretary? So uh, I think that was controversial as well. The other thing that I just want to point out, the last thing I want to say about the David Cameron appointment is we did an episode before the Suella Braverman episode on party conference season. And if you'll recall, Rishi Sunak in that, in his speech, he declared himself the man of change, right? If you want the candidate of change, vote for me, because we have had, all my predecessors were rubbish, and we had 13 years of indecision and austerity and those bad politics, and I'm here to wash away those old conservatives and bring in the new. And then what does he do? He brings in the person who was exactly the person he was railing against in that conference speech, who was the leader from 13 years ago, and makes him his foreign secretary. It is, to me, a sign of slightly muddled thinking from Rishi Sunak and a lack of a consistent message about where he is bringing the government and taking them to. Because I think a lot of people would say that, David Cameron in your cabinet shows a move to the centre slightly. He was quite a centrist politician, Conservatives compared to now, anyway. That's what David Cameron represents within the party. But also, Rishi Sunak in this reshuffle goes and gets Esther McVey, who is quite a to the right of the party, and makes her Minister for Common Sense, which is an absolutely bizarre title for a minister. I don't know. Have you seen much of this discussed, or did you see any of her appearance on Question Time?
I haven't seen Question Time, but I have heard a few clips, I think, via newscast. And yeah, I mean, just the whole. I saw Twitter reacting to the idea of a Minister for Common Sense, and yeah, I mean, it seems like a silly job title. It's not a normal ministerial position, but this is a bit like we had what was the weird one we had during? I know we had the person for delivering Brexit, but we also had another weird one around the time of Theresa May that everyone kind of moaned about as well. So there is form for them coming up with these made up ministerial appointments, so that they can have a minister, and it's like, this is very much a headline grabbing thing. What's she going to do? Stand around and be like, oh, I don't think that's a good idea. Maybe she should do that more to her own government.
Yeah, it's odd. I would think it's the Minister for Brexit Opportunities.
Yes,
was the one that Jacob Rees-Mogg had for a while, which was meant to be like, I'm not the Minister for Brexit, or now Brexit is done, I'm going to look for the opportunities, which is a narrow job role, but one that you want to be promoting. And unfortunately, I don't think Jacob Rees-Mogg appeared to have much success in that role. I value that Esther McVey will have even less success in hers. What they really mean by Minister for Common Sense is essentially like an anti-woke minister. That's what her views represent, and I think that's what she's going to try and push. It's almost like, here's a minister for the culture war that we can put out there anytime we want to talk on one of our culture war talking points. She will be the person we send out on the TV and radio, but it won't be about anti-woke. She'll be presented as the Minister for Common Sense, and the views will be from a common sense point of view. However, as Fiona Bruce did question Esther on Question Time, saying, does this suggest that the government hasn't had common sense before? Do you have the most common sense? Where is it from? And the moment you start to pick it apart like that, the whole meaning and job title and role kind of falls apart. So yeah, that was one of the odd picks I felt within the cabinet reshuffle. It was it was, it was unsurprising. I think you saw a lot of ministers quit because they said they wanted to focus on the battle in their own constituency. The next general election is on the horizon, and a lot of these Conservatives will face an uphill battle for re-election. So they'll want to be seen in and around in and around their constituents, and you can't do that if you're in Westminster all the time, because that's what the job of being a cabinet minister demands. You've also got a lot of people who just, as I said, that the carrot is starting to go. We've talked many times about how we think it's likely Rishi Sunak and the Conservatives will lose the next election. What's the point of trying to be a good boy or girl on the back benches to get that cabinet seat when you think you might be out of office in 6 months' time, however long this government goes on for? So, um, yeah, Rishi Sunak has an uphill battle with that cabinet. It was an odd reshuffle that saw a lot of old faces come in, and I think that an old faces and other ones leaving. I think the fact that David Cameron was in there at all maybe shows the dearth of talent that's in the Conservative Party at the moment, and how much they've struggled to churn up again. We're three prime ministers. Sorry, we are one, two, three, four. We're five prime ministers even into this Conservative election cycle with people in. It's hard. It's hard to find those talents to run your cabinet.
Yes, no, definitely. And I think I just want to kind of, I don't have much to add specifically, but I think let's set up a theme. You mentioned a minister for common sense. Are they saying the government didn't have common sense before? All these kind of things. I think maybe the theme to set up is that a lot of the stuff Sunak has been doing over the last year or so since he was became prime minister, when we interrogate it, it starts to fall apart a bit. And I think we'll probably talk about that a bit in our main story as well. But I think that's the theme we've noticed with a load of stuff that gets announced with a lot of fanfare. And then actually, when you start to look into it, it doesn't really make much sense. And things are definitely fraying at the seams, I would say. So speaking of, shall we move on into our main story for tonight? Yeah, so we are, I guess, hot off the presses. About an hour ago, there was a vote in the Commons on the Rwanda bill. Do we want to start with some context before we move into the bill
please.
itself?
I think it's always good to provide a little bit of context. And although it was something that I'd sort of heard the name bandied about for a long time now, it's weird when I was looking back through the history to think how long this has been with us and who first came up with the idea. So this Rwanda bill was put into motion by Boris Johnson back in April of 2022 when Priti Patel was Home Secretary. Boy, does that feel like an age away, even if it's only about 18 months ago, to think that that was a couple of prime ministers ago and how much stuff has happened since then. So it came into being, and the general premise is that you get, people come into the country and they want their asylum applications processed. Instead of holding them within the UK, you put them on a plane to Rwanda, where they stay and their asylum is processed there. And it may require that some people will stay in Rwanda rather than going to the UK, or they will be deported back to their home asylum successful. So that's the premise. So the whole point is that you get these asylum seekers processed. They never touch UK soil. You can kind of wash your hands of them. People, it was seen as a policy that would be popular amongst those in the red wall, where people think that immigration is a top priority, and it certainly is eye-catching and headline-grabbing as a policy. I think even to like the suggestion of sort of like taking somebody and shipping them off to Rwanda, for me at least, had kind of like a what was the old, I can't remember what they called it, but the old-fashioned policy of like, oh, we'll send them to a penal colony in Australia, like that kind of jazz. Like, we don't want them here, we'll just send them away to a random country. And for some people, that idea is very appealing in how strict it is, right? It makes the government seem hard line, and they think that it is an effective strategy to deter people from making the dangerous crossings across the channel to try and come to the UK. They think if you make that journey and you survive it and you land on our beaches, and the first thing you do is you're put in a plane and put to Rwanda, then that will act as a massive deterrent to stop people. So that's the kind of basic premise behind it. However, it's been one that's been fraught with legal battles and to and fro's in the court. So the first flights were meant to leave on June the 14th of 2022, but they never left. So lots of legal challenges, basically people saying that it was unlawful. It broke several sort of ways that you could appeal against it. Fit enough to take flights? Is it even, are they even allowed? Do they have a right to appeal when they get there? So these people stayed. The government put it through the High Court, and the High Court said that the Randall Bill was legal. Then the people appealed. So the asylum seekers appealed, and so it had to go to the Supreme Court, and then the Supreme Court judged that it was illegal and they couldn't proceed with the Rwanda bill. The government has since then been appealing that original Supreme Court decision, and recently, just after the cabinet reshuffle, they lost that appeal. So that confirmed that the original Rwanda bill was not legal under UK law, and there would have to be some change.
Just one thing to touch on with the courts is that, as you said, it lost to the Supreme Court, the point of which is to interpret the laws of the land, and also to check with international treaties. And basically, this didn't pass muster. That's why it got thrown out the first time. But all of this has been like, we mentioned this back, I think, during Brexit. There was the whole enemy of the people thing about the Supreme Court when they dismissed some of the Brexit stuff that Boris Johnson was trying to do. And I just want to kind of mention how bad it is to, kind of pull down those institutions that are meant to be impartial. We don't have a Supreme Court like in the US. It's not a political thing in the same way. They are doing their best to interpret. Obviously, each individual justice will have their own biases, but the idea is that overall it's meant to be an impartial body. And then when it doesn't do politically what Daily Mail readers might like, then suddenly it gets dragged out as like, oh, they're and it. I need only mention that other bad leaders from history have famously said courts were their enemies, and leave it at that. But I just want to touch on that before we press on.
No, I think you're absolutely right that there is, particularly with the vote that we had tonight and the divisions that it's brought about within the Conservative Party and the way this is being talked about, there is like a whiff of Brexit around it. And I don't think it's surprising that when we come to a bill that deals with immigration, that you are drawn up the same lines, that there are many of the same battle lines that were drawn up over the Brexit bill and how that passed. There is essentially a kind of a thought amongst a group of Conservative MPs where it's like, well, we're in charge, we make the rules, these are the rules, follow them. And the fact that the courts actually have to interpret the law and tell them, no, that this is illegal, they seem to take umbrage with that fact. They don't like that, it's that whole issue of sovereignty again. We've talked about, like, we control our own borders, we should be allowed to do this. But you also have to follow international and your own law at the same time. And they seem to get frustrated that the apparent simple solutions that they offer don't pass muster when it comes to legal challenges. So, we'll talk about it more with the actual vote itself. But yeah, keep those kind of that image of those turbulent Brexit days when Theresa May was fighting to get her bill through the courts and fighting to get it through the Houses of Commons as well. The same type of people keep popping up on both sides.
And yes, as you've just touched on, and I mentioned a bit, you have to follow your own laws. And it seems like the current government feels they can just ignore the laws of the land. And we said this a bit under Boris Johnson as well. When they say these things, it's like, no, you can't just say a thing and will it into being. It still has to go through Parliament. And even if you have a majority, it has to be voted on. And then, as you say, there's all these international treaties that we can't just renege on because we want to. So I think we'll probably maybe get into the weeds a bit more as we talk about the bill itself. But yeah, it's been in legal limbo. The person who's really pushing it was Suella Braverman, who we mentioned last time. And we kind of thought, because of all the stuff going on about it and her really wanting it to go through and it's going back and forth, we thought that would probably be what saw Braverman kicked out. It wasn't quite the reason she went in the end, because Sunak gave her a push before she could quit. What was the fallout of that?
Suella goes kind of in her resignation letter. She kind of said, oh, by the way, I think this is going to fail the courts. It appeared that the government knew that the writing was on the wall for the first edition of the bill that was there, and so it went ahead. The Supreme Court rejected the government's appeal, which put it once again into legal limbo. It was the reason this is so important for the government by the way, is not only do we have lots of MPs, and I've touched upon like it being a policy that some on the right in particular feel should be a flag mark policy and kind of a big stamp that says, look, we're tough on immigration. It's also one that so not only is it one where they want to seem that they are like tough on immigration, also kind of links to one of Rishi Sunak's 5 pledges. So I don't know if you remember this, but at the start of his premiership, he kind of laid down that I have 5 key pledges that I promise that I will sort out while I am in charge. Obviously, he's got quite a short deadline to make some progress on those until the next general election will have to happen for the Conservative Party. Out of those 5, he's maybe achieved one that lots of people argue isn't up to him. Inflation has gone down, but inflation has gone down worldwide since he promised to lower it, so he can't really claim responsibility for that. NH waiting times are still up. He's still got problems with housing, etc. But the other ones that he said was that he would stop the boats, and the Rwanda bill was meant to help stop the boats. So if he can't even get this through Parliament, it's a big red mark against his key pledges, and may show that he's sort of like ineffectual as a leader, that he can't follow through on promises. So hastily drawn up, there were a few amendments made to the bill. Namely, the biggest thing was that the new Home Secretary, James Cleverly, went over to Rwanda with a new treaty that tried to clear up a couple of issues that the Supreme Court had with the bill. Namely, these were that it gave immigrants the right to appeal. So essentially, there was a worry, particularly from some on the left of the Conservative Party, that asylum seekers could be sent there and then they'd never get the chance to appeal their decision. They would just be lost forever. That doesn't seem very fair or very legal. We don't want to go that far. So by enshrining that in the treaty and making sure Rwanda allows people to appeal, that makes it, sort of more robust under international law. Any judges of those appeals will be judged by an international court, not a Rwandan central one. So again, that makes sure that the process is theoretically more neutral in that sense. And the treaty declared that Rwanda was a safe country for asylum seekers to visit. That was one of the key problems that the Supreme Court had with sending people to Rwanda. There's been a lot of discussion about sort of like LGBT rights in Rwanda, cultural thing. If people are fleeing persecution from their country because they are gay, and then they are sent to Rwanda, a country traditionally still hostile to people from LGBTQ backgrounds, then obviously that doesn't seem to go very well with international law and defeats the whole point of asylum in the first place. So those were the safeguards that the government came in, but for a lot of Conservative MPs, they weren't enough. Namely, the most sort of high-profile person to disagree, I would say, was the current immigration minister at the time, Robert Jenrick, who used to be housing minister. He was probably the one, and the person who took over him said that, he's the person who knew that original Rwanda bill inside and out. He'd probably spent more time on it than anyone. So for him to walk away from the bill shows that he feels that maybe the original drive and push and sort of like the theme of the law has been watered down a little with these amendments. So see him go, certainly not a big blow. But this bill is controversial, and as I said, like Brexit, it shows up splits from within the Conservative.
Yeah, I mean, I think we can kind of highlight that. I mean, so there's all this talk of sovereignty and things like not allowing ourselves to be controlled by external courts, and then you've gone and signed a treaty that says any appeal will be judged by an international court, not the European Court of Human Rights necessarily, but an international court. It's amazing how these kind of arguments that were presented a year or two ago are suddenly kind of ignored when they have to do something hastily. And also the declaring safe part seems like you can't just make a treaty that says, oh, this thing's... Because the idea here is that treaties supersede English law, right, in the event that we've made a treaty, because that's how we honour our international commitments. You can't just go, oh, yeah, well, this treaty with Rwanda has decided that gravity doesn't exist, So maybe that's too extreme an example, but is that kind of... You can't just go, oh, well, they're safe because we said in a treaty with them, because the thing that determines safe in a legal context is not what's written on a piece of paper. There's various things that cause this check of safety. You know, you I don't know the exact terms for it because I'm not a lawyer, but you know, you send people off and they would have various tests. They always have these legal tests that they go through, these kind of things. I'm sure the legal test is not like, oh, the treaty says it's okay in this particular instance. But so yes, you alluded to it's causing problems, a bit like Brexit. But this doesn't, I mean, it's not a policy I'm a fan of as not a member of the Conservative Party, but it seems like it's falling into this kind of weird, it's not a centrist policy, but it is falling into this weird middle ground where it is annoying both right and left-wing Conservatives. How's it splitting the
it's
party?
almost like the classic Theresa May problem that she had with Brexit, where her deal, those on the left of the party felt that it went too far, and those on the right party felt that it didn't go far enough. So, for example, this immigration bill for the right of the party, and by that I'm talking about the European Research Group, and a new group that seems to have popped up calling themselves the New Conservatives, which I've had a quick look at their website. I will drop it in the chat for you. It's an odd mixture of MPs, mostly of those who are from the 2019 intake, and they're sort of red wall MPs. So they would argue that they represent sort of like a new brand of conservative. We're not the traditional sort of country and garden conservatives. We represent real working constituencies up in the north. This is what these people, this is what these people want. That these are the people that voted for Brexit. Those old 2019 issues we're talking about there. They think that this is the best way to keep their seats in the red wall, and they don't like the fact, essentially, that it's not strong enough. They don't like the fact that there is a right to appeal. They feel that this will lead to sort of more dither and delay, as asylum seekers will, use the legal process to try and slow things up as much as possible. And they've got they've got one eye on the clock, essentially saying we need a plane to leave for Rwanda with asylum seekers before the next general election, because if it doesn't, then this will be sort of that elephant in the room as a policy that was touted, that was meant to do something and did absolutely nothing at all. And because they don't think it's strong enough, or because, as Marc Francois said, who's one of the sort of, he's the tiny Conservative MP that looks like Penfold from Danger Mouse, if you don't know who he is. But he essentially went on television, and I saw him on. I do my research on both sides, so I've ruined my YouTube algorithm for this podcast by watching GB News. He went on there and said that we've looked at this new treaty that the government has put forward and this bill, and put it against the Star Chamber of lawyers, sort of like a very senior group of lawyers that have access to, and they don't think that these changes will change the opinion of the Supreme Court. We reckon if this goes through, we are setting ourselves up for failure. We need it to be more robust. We need it to go harder. Maybe we need to even change the law before we put this Rwanda policy through. And so because of that, a lot of them struggled to support it. And in the end, in the vote tonight, a lot of them chose to abstain. The fight with those on the left for Rishi Sunak appears to have gone better. They were really worried that the bill might break international law, that sort of bit where they say it's safe because we say it's safe. They're nervous about that part. And a few of them are just nervous about the policy in general, that it might be misused, and you might get people sent there who, they're sending asylum seekers to a country that isn't safe, and like you said, simply declaring it so doesn't make it so. So a few of them were nervous about that. It appears that he's got that side of the party who support him. Those on the right, of course, the real issue. And when it came down to the vote tonight, the eventual result, well, I don't know if you want to give it to us, but yeah, it wasn't quite as convincing as Rishi Sunak hoped.
No, well, I mean, I think the important context here is that there is a majority of 80 within the House for the Conservatives. So if everyone who isn't Conservative voted against, and the Conservatives all voted for, then they'd win by 80 votes, which is, we've discussed this before, like we're in that period where realistically the government should be winning every vote it puts forwards because it just has such a big majority, even though there's been dribs and drabs who have been lost from the height of when Boris Johnson got them there, with all these by-elections we keep talking about and various people leaving disrepute. But yes, they should win by a clear 80, especially if there is a 3-line whip, as I believe there was. The bill did pass, but only by 44 votes. That means some Conservatives have abstained. I don't think there was anyone who voted against. I think it was all abstentions. But that is, I mean, if you look now on the BBC website, you have people saying, "Oh no, well, that's better than we expected," and other people saying, "Oh, well, that's pretty bad." What's your opinion on that? Is that good or bad for Sunak?
Yeah, so it is fairly bad. I'm just having a look at the list of prominent people who abstained from the vote. So that included Robert Jenrick, who was the former immigration minister, Mark Francois, who I just mentioned, who was the leader of that right wing group, and Suella Braverman. So it's clear what wing of the party is not content with Rishi Sunak, and that's the big problem for him, isn't it? Really, that he has an unruly wing of his party that he is unable to control. 38 MPs is significant. If they choose to vote against it for the next, so he's got it past the second reading phase. If he hadn't, he would have been the first prime minister since Margaret Thatcher back in 1986 to get a bill fail at the second reading phase. He still has to have this bill pass a third reading and go through the House of Lords, both of which will make a lot of will put up a lot of challenges for him. The third reading in particular is where people get their final say, so that's where you might get people voting against instead of abstaining. I think the right wing of the party has given Sunak the benefit of the doubt now and said, well, we'll let it continue and hope that through discussion that we can add amendments that we feel strengthen the bill to our liking, but not strengthen it too much that you alienate the left of the party. And then in the Lords, it's you get a different demographic in the Lords. I don't remember if we've discussed the Lords in detail in the past, but the way they read bills, they do tend to go into the minutiae. And although there are party political divides within the House of Lords, they tend to act as sort of like a backstop to make sure that nothing too severe or serious passes into law. They're not shy about handing bills back to the government and say, no, you need to make amendments before we can pass that would likely soften the bill some. So those are the big issues for Rishi Sunak getting this past Parliament in the first place. And of course, all this does is it undermines Rishi Sunak's authority, which is something that has been in short supply for him at the moment. No leader wants to have clear divides in their party. Splits make you appear weak, particularly when you have those people who are eyeing up your job, Suella Braverman being one of them, who's been like one of the more vocal critics. She wants to be the next Conservative leader. She argued very heavily in her letter that Rishi Sunak could not lead the party to victory in a general election, and that the only way that the Conservatives could avoid electoral oblivion would be for this bill to pass and to have a strong leader like, oh, I don't know, her in charge. Weird that she would suggest that, but that's why this is not the end of the road for Rishi Sunak's troubles. He's only got more coming up, more wrangling to do. One of the key decisions that was made in order for him to get the support on the left of the party is that usually when you have a bill like this, it goes to a small committee and is read line by line and it is scrutinised. To ensure that the left of the party was got on his side, he agreed to have the bill scrutinised in full by the entire houses of Parliament. Okay, so again, we're talking about the old Brexit days where that Brexit reform was read line by line, paragraph by paragraph, every comma, capital letter strewn over, seeing what the legal implications for that, and oh, I'm not happy about this sentence here. Can this be removed? Because I would like to have my interpretation in here. It gets messy and it gets vocal and it gets even messier when it's a party fighting against itself and the government can't provide the clear leadership on that. He's got the Theresa May problem where he's being held hostage by quite a vocal wing of his party. And again, it's those on the right that are looking to move the Conservative Party further to the right. And he knows that he needs to keep at least some of them on side because as a as a powerful voting bloc, if there were 38 abstentions tonight, I think if all 38 of those were to vote against, that goes well over the 44 majority, because of course you flip 38, you lose 38 from the other side as well. It's not, they don't need 22, whatever it is. It would be, yeah, they would lose, certainly. So.
You touched on him before. Marc Francois is out there saying, oh, look, we're going to have a proper look at it in the new year and we might vote against it. and I've got those 38 people in my back pocket, kind of thing. So it is, yeah. Maybe he didn't quite put it in those in that phrase, but yeah, basically they're saying the ERG group who he leads reserve the right to vote against the bill. So yeah, holding that over him. We may touch on this a bit more a bit later because we're going to talk about how the public feels about all of this. But it does seem very odd to me that. So I know it's one of his key pledges. I don't know why he made the pledges. I never really thought it was a sense, but like, surely everyone understands from the times of people putting their pledges onto big stone tablets and things like that, that this is a thing you don't do in British politics. We briefly touched it. So halving inflation this year, I mean, that's happened, but he didn't do it because it's just a thing that happens in the economy. Economy growing, kind of maybe, but like no one can really say he's done much on that. Debt falling, I don't think he's managed to do that. I think it, in fact, may have gone up. Don't quote me on that. And then current and NHS waiting lists, as far as I can tell, they've done nothing on that. So that leaves you with small votes. So it's like the only policy he can really try and force a change on. So I get he's kind of putting it just seems so short-sighted and daft to have set up these 5 almost impossible challenges and then not done anything on 3 of them where you could have maybe had an easy win, or at least, he could have put something out saying, we're making some rule about waiting lists and then blame it on the NHS trusts themselves, which is the kind of thing Conservatives have done before. But he hasn't. So why has he got himself stuck into this, like between a rock and a hard place with his own party over something that no one seems to really want? As far as like, obviously there are some people he thinks it'll appeal to voting wise, but it seems such a weird thing. Like, when it was first mentioned, we were all like, what are you on about?
Yeah, I agree. And I think Rishi Sunak has found himself in a real kind of, I was watching on YouTube. There was a great interview between Times Radio and Ian Hislop, editor of Private Eye, about his review of the year, and it struck me when he mentioned this. He said at the start of the Premiership, at the start of the year, we all thought that it was going to be quite boring. Rishi Sunak was meant to be the man who get his head down, get things done. There would be less of this sort of showy politics that there was under Boris Johnson. But towards the end of this year, panic seems to have set in, and Rishi Sunak's really sort of struggled to find like a coalition of voters that can get behind him. He wants something to brand himself as, to come out to the public and say, look, this is me, this is the brand, this is where I'm taking it. The pledges, if he could meet them, was meant to show that he's a competent leader and he's somebody who keeps his promises. Finally, a politician who sets these targets and delivers. But oh no, he set himself up for failure there because he's failed to deliver, as you said. If he could only get 1 or maybe 2, that's still a majority failure. So he looks bad. He's panicked on a few things, like the Conservatives win 1 by-election where they win on a local issue about a green zone. Suddenly, the Conservatives are the most anti-green party going because, hey, that's what the public want, right? Oh, immigration. What? This is really important for Conservative Party voters, and I can see the threat from Reform UK and the spectre of Nigel Farage and the right, the right and the far right taking some of my voters away. I really need to make sure that I've got them for my next election. So the Rwanda bill has to go through so I can point them to that and say, look, we were really strict. Here's our big strict immigration bill. Aren't we the most right-wing party ever? You'll vote for me, right? Like he's scrambling around for votes and trying to get people on side. And while he appeals to one set of people, of course, those on the other side slip away. And that's where his problem is. He is trying to be all things to everybody in the Conservative Party, and nobody's buying it. Yeah, that is the super big problem. Yeah, so I think that's where it's really going wrong for Rishi Sunak. I haven't got much to add unless you have got any insights into why the wheels seem to be coming off. I mean, the only other thing we didn't mention early on was his row with the Greeks, which was really bizarre. I thought, if we want to make this Rishi Sunak corner,
yeah, short-sighted is one way of describing it. I'm not sure the best way to describe it, but like I think we've touched on before. It'd be better if politicians in general, not just the Conservatives, were looking, more looking into the future, further long-term planning. Obviously, shorter-term stuff is useful for getting like votes and stuff for general elections. We understand that there's a reason people only tend to plan for a few years because they have the next general election on the horizon, all of this stuff. But it seems like he can't look forward more than a few hours to make the headlines, or he is just getting the complete wrong inputs of who to react to, because like we've discussed all of this, and then the Greek Prime Minister was over to have a chat to him, said something on Laura Kuenssberg's show on the Sunday evening about the Elgin. I think she asked him the questions, what about the Elgin marbles? And he, being the Greek Prime Minister, obviously said, well, of course we'd like them back because they're ours, which is true. I think every Greek minister, when asked the question, would give the same answer. And then Rishi Sunak was like, oh, well, no, we can't possibly, because maybe he's so worried about being in an interview with someone who isn't completely on side. I mean, he had this weird chat with Elon Musk about AI fairly recently, and it was kind of very odd where he kind of seemed to be fawning over Elon Musk. But of course the Greek Prime Minister is going to want the Elgin marbles back. How has that changed from the day before? Just because it was said on the, and then you go, oh, well, I'm not going to have a chat with him, send him the Deputy Prime Minister. That annoys the Greeks, who are one of our allies. Like, such a weird set. Like, the cause and effect should be obvious. So why make this decision? And what's it gaining you? It gains you most people going, why are you doing such stupid things? And maybe it gains you support of one or two people who are like, oh, I really don't like the Greeks in your party, which, like, that's not a normal conservative talking point, is it? And then, of course, and then just to make it very funny, like when all the Brexit stuff was going on and the Queen wore a hat, looked a bit like it was in EU colours, and everyone was like, oh, the Queen and her amazing wardrobe, she trots out to take the mick out of things. And then the King was over somewhere and he was wearing a Greek tie, because famously his dad is Greek. It's like a country we should have relatively close ties to. Let's just annoy them for no real reason. And the thing is, the British Museum are actually trying to give the Elgin marbles back. They want to get rid of this like, before this came up, like, they were already trying to get this done because they're like, everyone keeps moaning about this and it's affecting our bottom line as a museum. We'd actually be quite happy to give them back, or at least it's the impression I get from the stuff I've listened to on this. And just to go off on like a random thing about it seems so strange.
It was, and to juxtapose it, it was Keir Starmer. I don't know if you saw his performance in PMQs after.
I didn't. I haven't been up to date with it this week.
No, that's fine. It was, so it's not last week, it's the one just before last. It's probably the most forlorn I've seen Rishi Sunak in a PMQs up against Keir Starmer. Keir Starmer said, look, by the way, I met with the Greek Prime Minister because on these visits, as often happens, is that the foreign dignitary will also meet the leader of the opposition, particularly if he thinks that leader of the opposition might be in charge next year. It's good to touch base and just to see where you might be going with that. He said, oh, he mentioned the Elgin marbles to me. I mentioned it back. We disagreed. We moved on. That's politics. That's diplomacy. That's what you do. Grow up. Because I think the whole thing is that Rishi Sunak's team had they'd had like a memorandum with the Greeks where they said, we won't bring up the Elgin marbles. You don't bring up the Elgin marbles. We'll be fine. And because the Greeks were seen to have broken that promise, said it was mentioned on the BBC by somebody, a direct question to the Greek Prime Minister, it's very unlikely that he's just going to ignore that. Rishi Sunak appeared to throw his toys out the pram, whereas Keir Starmer appeared statesmanlike. He did the prime ministerial thing, which was rebut it, and then they carried on and talked about it. And the weirdest attack line that came from Rishi Sunak as well was he said that, look, this is just another example of the Labour leader siding with those from the EU rather than the British people, to which Keir Starmer quite rightly snapped back. He said, Greece is a NATO ally, and we should be shoulder to shoulder with our allies, not rejecting them. So, yeah, that's like the two. When Rishi Sunak panics, he appears to pull out Jeremy Corbyn out of a hat and remind people that he exists and that Keir Starmer once worked under him. And sometimes I think Keir Starmer had also said that week that his favourite classical song was "Ode to Joy," which is the the official theme tune of the European Union. He kind of still pulls it out and says, "Look, he loves the EU. That Keir Starmer, you can't trust him." But it doesn't appear to be working. Those lines don't appear to be working as well in the Commons. So yeah, Sunak in trouble, but of course that leaves Labour with a question to answer, because immigration will still be an issue for the Labour Party if they come into power.
Of course, the answer to that question is, why do you like Ode to Joy? Because I love Die Hard. Sorry, that was just a quick aside. Yeah, so the Labour Party, as you say, what are they going to do on immigration? I mean, they have some really obvious attack lines here. I think the first one is quite obvious, that they've spent all this money on the Rwanda bill so far to send 0 people over. What is it now? Up to about 400 million, I think you've got in the notes. Yeah, which is a lot of money.
Yes, yeah, 300. They think they found another 100 million today or something. It was bizarre.
Yeah, the fact that they could, like, I understand, before you do things, you have to like undergo, studies. Is this the right thing to do? And we have to set stuff. All of that makes sense. And they also gave some money direct to the Rwandan government, I believe, as part of the treaty. But surely by now, 6 months in with this, but if you'd actually thought about it and put some planning in, maybe you could have done the thing you said you were going to do. As I think we've touched on, doesn't seem very well planned out from the get-go, just a thing that was said to grab headlines. How would Labour get out of this hole? I mean, I guess that's not exactly what they're asking. What would Labour do?
Yeah, so Labour have they've said that they want to reduce immigration too. They feel that, so when it comes to sort of like, well, I'll go into more detail about like public opinion on migration a little bit, but it is something that in general the British public want reduced. There are a number of reasons behind that, and the numbers portray quite a different story than what people think. But on the whole, people want to have some control over immigration, or have it steady or come in at a more consistent rate rather than going up as it is at the moment. So Labour have said, particularly when it comes to the issue of stopping the boats, they would look to stop the boats at source. They would go to track down these criminal gangs, work with Interpol, give their specialist support to make sure that you stop those people crossing in the first place. So that eliminates one thing. They've also said that they'd like to help clear the backlog and get money to reduce the huge backlog that's built up of asylum claims. This has been slowly building and building and building under the Conservative government. And some people say that it actually adds to the amount of money that we have, because the longer it takes to process somebody's asylum, once they are in the UK, they need to be looked after. And that has come in the form sometimes of, you've heard of like these asylum hotels, where essentially asylum seekers get put in hotels and the government pays the hotel rent. Essentially, it rents out those rooms to hold these people safely until those until their asylum application can be processed. And if that's taking months rather than weeks, then hey, you have to pay that hotel for all of that time. And again, that's not an efficient use of taxpayers' money. So I think the Labour's short version of their solution is like, you have to work smarter, not harder. You don't have to have a hardline policy that stops people coming over, particularly when, if they just sort of like look past it and look at the numbers, does the Rwanda policy really deter anyone if it has sent 0 people to Rwanda so far? Like, I would say no. You still take the risk, because yeah, there's no risk of being deported to Rwanda at the moment, is there? There's probably another 6 months of dither and delay if you were able to process those loans quicker, or if you're able to stop the gangs at source. That's how Labour say that they would solve the issue. And I don't know how well that's going to go across with the public, but I do think that it sounds to me like a sensible solution if you want to deal with some of those problems. And one, most importantly for me, one that's kind of like based in reality. Those things are possible. Like, if you put that 400 million into those, I feel like you would have made more progress. You may not have made the same type of headlines, but I think you would see more of a material effect on the ground.
Yeah, and I think essentially what I was saying there is, maybe if you thought about a policy before enacting it for more than a minute, so that, that'll do well in the sun.
It is a Boris Johnson policy, remember? It does have a
yes. No, I appreciate some, but still, I mean, Sunak could have come in and said, I'm a breath of fresh air, and I'm ignoring that silly thing Boris suggested because we've just got rid of him, right? Because he was silly. That would have been fine. That's a thing you could have done instead of digging this hole deeper and deeper. It just, it doesn't make much sense to me that he's continued with it. So yeah, I mean, that all that sounds more reasonable from the Labour Party. And like you say, if a large problem with like you're saying about going with Interpol and stuff and working to stop these criminals who are sending people across. But to be clear, the people on the boats aren't criminals; they are asylum seekers. But the people who run these boats that are dodgy and then loads of people die are doing something illegal. And stopping it before they come across, or working with other countries to maybe, there are reasons why sometimes people have to come over to the UK, but there are countries between us and the countries these people are fleeing that could take people in, and you can work with. That there's a whole international treaty about who takes on immigrants from different countries, and you could work on that and be like, look, because we don't want people just dying getting here either. That's awful. So you want to, all of that kind of stuff sounds quite sensible. I know there's some people saying, I've seen some people going, "Oh, Labour just as bad as the Conservative," and I was like, it does at least seem like they've thought about it. I still think a lot of people are going to come over here, whatever you do. But yeah, at least they've kind of considered it. And to be clear, I just want to, at the end of that summary, just to be clear, I don't have a problem with people coming into the UK. It's just, if people are coming across in an unsafe way, I think they should be allowed to come across in a safe way, where they don't have the possibility of drowning in the channel. So yeah, I mean, what is our general overview? So like I mentioned, it seems weird to me that they're putting all this effort into something that seems quite niche. I mean, I know there are some very, we know from Brexit there are some people who don't want to be in Europe, even though Europeans aren't the kind of, they're not the illegal immigrants we're thinking of. They're people who are coming over here as, normal. Well, they weren't even immigrants with the EU, really. They were just coming over and working here because you could. We know that obviously there is a group of people who don't like that idea, who want to take back Britain and all this kind of stuff. But where does the public stand? So we've got two polls, I think, to look at. Yes. The first poll is YouGov, and I think I actually took part in this poll because I do the YouGov of things occasionally. So the question put to people was: the government has proposed a deal where some people who have entered Britain and applied for asylum will be flown to Rwanda in Africa for their asylum applications to be processed. Do you support or oppose this proposal? So 23% of people don't know. I mean, fine, I guess. You may not want to answer the question when it comes up because it comes up with a list of other questions. And also, you may just want to think about the ramifications for a bit. You might not immediately know. Fair enough. Then we have strongly support is 20%. So more people don't know than support the policies strongly. Tend to support 15%. So it's 35% in the for column. And then you have 15% tend to oppose and 27% strongly oppose. So overall, that is opposition. And then you also have a pile of people who don't know. What do you take away from that, Rob?
Well, it shows to me that ultimately the policy tends to be a bit more unpopular with the general public than it is popular. There's a politics tab on that site as well. So if you go to that, there's some really interesting numbers there. That's where they start to shift. So if you're a Labour voter, 51% of people who have declared themselves as Labour voters strongly oppose it, and 17 tend to oppose. Only about 15% in total, if you're a Labour voter, either strongly support or tend to support it. Flip that with the Conservatives, 39% strongly support and 20% support it. So that is a majority, 59%. So if you're looking at an issue that is important for the Conservative Party, then it's there. So clearly that's why Rishi Sunak feels that he needs to follow through on this deal, because it is popular with those who want to vote Conservative. And as I said, he is worried from the threat on the right from people like Reform UK. If he fails, said that he's failed on immigration or failed to reduce it, or this policy has failed, then those Conservatives, those 39% of them who strongly support this policy, will be disappointed that it hasn't gone ahead. And just so you're aware, these poll ones, if we can have them in I know you always are good at citing the sources and putting them in our notes. I watched an H Bomber Guy video on plagiarism.
Yes, so have I. Yes,
so I want us to cite our sources. So that was the state of play. That's the most recent one I can find, at least from YouGov. That was conducted on the 14th of April 2022. So that is the sort of OG Boris Johnson policy. So I do wonder how attitudes will have changed, given that it's over 18 months since that policy was proposed. But given its failures so far to get anything done, I doubt that people would have got a stronger view or an even more support for that policy, given the fact that it's been quite ineffectual so far.
Yeah, and then we've also got we'll put a link in the show notes again for this because it's even more in depth. Public opinion on migration in the United Kingdom is divided, is the headline of this. This is the UK public opinion toward immigration, overall attitudes and level of concern from 28th of September 2023. I think we'll probably draw out the top graph there, which is attitudes towards immigration in Great Britain 2023. The top question is, do you think the number of immigrants coming to Britain nowadays should be increased, reduced, or should it remain the same? So don't know is 12%, increased a lot is 6%, increased a little is 8%, remain the same is 22%. So that's 36. That's almost 48% is in the, it's either the same, slightly more, but like generally either okay or indifferent to, I'm grouping in don't know there. So maybe that's a bit, someone could say, oh, well, they're not actually indifferent. I would argue if you give an indifferent answer, you may be indifferent. And then the 15% say reduced a little and 37% reduced a lot. So there are still a lot of people who don't like immigration in the country. And then you have possibly a more interesting question. On the whole, do you think immigration is a good thing or a bad thing for Britain? So there's a lot of people saying, oh, we want less. But if you go to, is it good or bad? The numbers do change. So the very bad is only 17% and the bad 16%. 30% of people are indifferent in the neither bad or good category. And then you have 23% of people saying it's good and 8% saying it's very good, with 6% don't knows. So I've always never really understood this dichotomy myself, where people like really don't want to integrate immigration, but more than the majority of people think it's either doesn't have an effect or is good.
To me, these numbers are really interesting, and I think it shows that when it comes to how immigration is talked about by leading politicians, particularly those in the Conservative Party at the moment, and I would say like the tabloids, their views are a lot more hardline than the general public's own views would suggest. So the top figure from that one, you can say that 53% of people want to reduce migration, think migration should be reduced as a general rule in the UK. However, from the bottom figure, you can say that at least 53%, sorry, add the 8%, 61% of people think that migration isn't a bad thing as well, right? So when you're going about going really hard hitting on migration, is that what most people want? They seem to want some level of control and a lever that they can pull to keep the numbers at least steady or stop them going up. But they do recognise that migrants have a part to play in Great Britain and the wider economy. And you go down this article, there's a really interesting thing. There's a really interesting question that I think pulls apart some of the hypocrisies or the struggles of when you ask these sort of questions to the public or how people think about it. So it's at figure 7.
Oh, sorry, big scroll.
It's about
yeah.
Oh, sorry. Figure 7, it's about low-skilled workers. So asked the simple question, do you think that immigration for low-skilled jobs should be made easier or more difficult? Those who think it should be made super difficult or more difficult, that's 19 at 17%. So that's what, 36% of people think it should be made really difficult. However, when you then go on to ask people about specific low-skilled jobs, for example, lorry drivers, construction workers, farm and agricultural workers, those numbers drop loads. So it's 19% for low-skilled workers, but we only think 6% of construction workers, it should be made really hard for them to get in. For farmers, the figure's 6% as well. For care workers, it's 5%. It's clear that even those who are really against immigration see that there are certain jobs and roles within the country where it's important that we have migrants in to do the work. When the issue is generalized, they can be quite hard-nosed about it. But when you talk about the specifics and certain jobs within the country that need it, then their views soften a whole lot. And to me, it makes me think that particularly the Conservatives' view on this isn't nuanced enough for that conversation to happen. Maybe the British public isn't quite there at that nuance yet to have that conversation, because immigration is a tough one to have, right? But these figures open my eyes a little bit to think you can sometimes think that, oh no, you can take a look at that headline figure of 53% of people want to reduce migration into the UK, and you can think, oh my goodness me, it's like 51 and what was the old Brexit number? Was it always 48, 52? That's practically the Brexit number, right? That those attitudes since Brexit haven't changed. Brexit was all about immigration and lowering immigration. And lo and behold, after that vote has gone ahead, 5 years after Boris Johnson was able to get through the Brexit deal through Parliament, immigration is at some of its highest levels since then. Immigration from the EU is down, but immigration from outside the EU is up so much that we're actually up above those numbers than when we were in the EU. So, as it turns out, leaving the EU wasn't the silver bullet to immigration that some people thought it was. So now they have to look at other reasons. Why hasn't the move out of the EU worked? Why has the freedom of movement thing not worked? Do we actually need migration in some places? We've got to move this conversation along and start having more grown-up conversations rather than shouting about moving people to Rwanda. And I think the underlying numbers in this data, take away that headline figure, about 53% of people wanting to reduce migration, and you actually talk to them about it in detail, it softens. They want smarter immigration policy, and I don't know if that's being offered up by Rishi Sunak at the moment, and it'll be up for Keir Starmer to address that and see what bigger plans he has for immigration as a whole, because I think it's going to be one of the things that the next general election is for.
Yeah, I just want to pull out a few interesting tidbits from this info here. So firstly, just to say, low-skilled and high-skilled workers are categories that are used all the time in these kinds of these kind of questionnaires and stuff. That's just the terms that are there. They're not the terms we'd necessarily ascribe. I don't believe construction workers are low-skilled. I think they have a lot of. It's just what they mean is people who have not necessarily had to do a degree to do their job is basically how they split it, and they use the terms low and high skilled. One thing I find interesting, so you said the low skilled, it's like, no, we don't have any of them over here except when you go into the separate jobs. It seems like we do. High skilled workers, it's more like, yeah, bring loads of high skilled. My favorite bit here is that 21% of people are like, no, we do not want more foreign finance sector workers. None of those bankers. We've got enough bad bankers over here. Thank you. Which I find mildly amusing. So yes, that's that graph there. Just going back up one to kind of end on a lighter note, a note of hope. Figure 2, opposition to immigration from 1964 to 2023 starts with a staggering 86% of the British electorate who are surveyed saying they are opposed to immigration in the 1960s, and dropping down to, in the best case, 2 years ago, 19%. So that is a general positive trend, and hopefully it may continue in that general vein. So I it's very easy to go, oh, there's more immigrants and all this kind of stuff that happens in the news. In general, we are having more people come into the country, and that's a good thing, I think, personally. There's all sorts of stuff, but generally people who come over here want to work and generate taxes that pay for all the things that the people who, like the aging population can't deal with and stuff like that. So there are many benefits to immigration. We don't have time to go into now, but a good graph. It's nice to see that in general, people are more accepting now than they were, which I don't think surprises anyone, but it's nice to see it plotted out like that and go, oh, that's good. It's interesting that actually it's quite a big dive from like the mid 2010s. So it's like, it was kind of steady through the 90s, lower than it was, lower than it was in the up through the 80s. But then, it starts to go down. So I think generally people are like, oh yeah, no, we should, look after immigrants and not be opposed to them and all of that. So moving on from that, we have a quick look at the polls, I think, ahead of us, because general election could be any day now, but it's not going to be tomorrow. Could be any day now. Some adverts have been seen for people to do jobs related to elections in May. So that's the closest indication I think we've seen. That may mean, of course, they're starting a job in May that would continue for the rest of the year. But yeah, like jobs have started to pop up for possible things for people, and that kind of rumor is going around that maybe it'll be a May election, which would be back to the usual system instead of having it near Christmas like we did last time. So yeah, let's have a look at we have our current prediction from the general election prediction, and we also have poll of polls. So let's start on the poll of polls. Not much movement since we last looked, I don't think. A very slight dip down. I think Labour last time we looked were on 44%, they're now on 43%. And the Conservatives have gone from 25% to 25%. So where has that gone? 1% has gone to Reform. This is very much in the realm of noise. The gap is still so big between Labour and the Conservatives, it doesn't matter that much. And then, we'll go to the prediction website we've used before, general election prediction. So currently predicting a Labour majority of 268. I feel that might be slightly lower than it was last time, but it's still, Labour probability of being the largest party, 99%. Probability of Labour having a majority is 97%. So, it's still in that kind of, like, nothing has really changed. I don't think we have much to add here, unless there's an extra bit of information you'd like to throw in.
No, I think the only thing I want to say is that, that poll of polls thing goes all the way through the year. That gap has been 20% for an entire year. Like, we've had an entire year of Rishi Sunak essentially in charge, and he seemed to make very little headway into the Labour lead. And that's the problem. Maybe that's why we talked about why he was like scrambling around and panicking and trying to get something. He wants something to just give him any kind of bump in the polls, and nothing seems to be moving the needle. The British public does seem to be quite fixed at the moment on who it prefers over Labour and Conservatives. There seem to be firmly Labour and Conservative. So, May general election, as you said, seems almost inevitable now. They might hang on till October if they want to. But yes, I don't know what we've talked about. All the sorts of rabbits Rishi Sunak has tried to pull out of the hat: green energy, David Cameron, Rwanda. None of them have had no impact. If he doesn't find one soon, then a general election is all that's left.
Yeah, and well, I say the sooner the better. I think it sounds like it might be in May, and there's an amount of building up to elections that has to happen. So I feel like it's unlikely they're going to drop a surprise one on us. There you go. That can be our first prediction for 2024. It's probably going to be May, and they're not going to drop a surprise one on us. There you go. You can join us in our next episode, where we will be doing analysing our predictions from last year and talking about our predictions for next year, which we will thankfully be doing in person once again. So I think that'll be the next. We're not going to get to it'll be Christmas by the time we would record our next episode, and I'm not doing that to us on Christmas Eve. So yes, it will be in person just before the new year. Yeah, so as always, you can find us in all the places I usually mention. You can find us at parliamentary.observer, a web domain I'm still surprised they let us have. You can find us at patreon.com/TTSS, where you will find all the shows on the network, though it's mostly on parliamentary language these days. Throw $1 our way and you will get access to bonus content, mostly Rob and I talking about our lives, fun stuff we've done, what we're doing in the lead up to Christmas, video games we've played. We haven't yet talked about 4-hour deep dives from H Bomber Guy that we've both watched, but I'm sure we will. Yes, you can support us there if you like. It helps pay to keep the lights on, keep us in microwaves, in microphones. It helps to pay to keep the lights on, keep us in microphones, and Adobe Creative Cloud subscriptions so that I can edit the podcast. And also web hosting, that thing we have to pay for so that we actually have a podcast for you to listen to. And of course, you can also go to, you can find us on X/Twitter still, though we just share episodes on there at Unpub Podcast. I would generally recommend you go and chat under our episodes on the website, or you can go to reddit.com/r/unparliamentary, or you can find us on Facebook as Unparliamentary Language, and you can also find us on Instagram at Unpul Podcast. And I don't think there's anything else left for me to say other than it's good night from me. Bye.
And it's good night from him. Bye.
Bye. Merry Christmas.
Bye. Bye-bye. Merry Christmas. Oh.